Most of the pupils did. In fact, as Alfie burst through the door, all the kids were loitering in the middle of the classroom, looking like they would rather be anywhere else than here. They were reluctantly trying to improvise, or impro, as Snood called it, a scene based around the end of the world. This was always Snood's favourite starting point for any impro, the world ending. A giant meteor is about to hit the Earth. Impro! Is how the floating egg would start most of his classes. Then Snood would take his chair and spin it around rather dramatically. Hello. With it facing the wrong way, he would sit with his short legs astride it. From there, the drama teacher would watch intently as his pupil shuffled to and fro, mumbling something about a giant meteor hitting the Earth, but really just praying for an actual meteor to hit the Earth, save them from the embarrassment. I said, impro! Exclaimed Snood. I'm not doing drama today, sir, uttered Alfie. That doesn't matter, boy, announced Snood in a deep, rich voice. It sounded as rich as chocolate mousse. You have to become part of the theme. So, a giant meteor is about to hit the Earth and wipe out all human, animal, and plant life. Impro! Said Alfie. He couldn't think of a single thing to say, but could hear the moped stuttering outside the room. Impro! Implored Mr. Snood. Bad news about the whole giant meteor thing. He is hitting the Earth, muttered Alfie. But on the upside, the pizza that we're doing here.
Well, I think it would be a great advance if Cadbury's cream eggs were available not just at Easter, but all year round. They were one of my most popular items. I also strongly believe that Quavers should diversify from cheese flavours to incorporate Asian chicken and lamb Rogan Josh varieties. And most importantly, and I know this may be controversial, but I think that coffee revels should be banned as they spoil an otherwise wonderfully enjoyable confectionery. There, I've said it. Right, said Mother. And if you promise to change the government policy on those issues, you can rely on my vote, Mrs. Crumb. Mother had a mixed response to her campaigning so far and was eager to secure this potentially crucial vote. Yes, I will certainly try, Raj, she said. Thank you so much, said Raj. Please help yourself to something from the shop. No, I possibly couldn't, Raj. Please, Mrs. Crumb, have a nice box of Terry's All Gold. I have only taken out the caramel squares. They are delicious. And perhaps Chloe'd like this finger of fudge.
I know I'm not an ordinary 10-year-old kid. I mean, sure, I do ordinary things. I eat ice cream, I ride my bike, I play ball, I have an Xbox. Stuff like that makes me ordinary, I guess, and I feel ordinary inside. But I know ordinary kids don't make other ordinary kids run away screaming in playgrounds. I know ordinary kids don't get stared at wherever they go.
Yeah, Umbridge gave the Slytherin Quidditch team permission to continue playing straight away. I went to ask her first thing this morning. Well, it was pretty much automatic. I mean, she knows my father really well. He's always popping in and out of the ministry. It'll be interesting to see whether Gryffindor are allowed to keep playing, won't it? Don't rise, Hermione whispered, imploring to Harry and Ron, who were both watching Malfoy, faces set and fists clenched. It's what he wants. I mean, said Malfoy, raising his voice a little more, his grey eyes glittering malevolently in Harry and Ron's direction. If it's a question of influence with the Ministry, I don't think they've got much chance from what my father says. They've been trying to look for an excuse to sack Arthur Weasley for years. And, well, as for Potter, my father says it's a matter of time before the Ministry has him carted off to St. Mungo's. Apparently they've got a special ward for people whose brains have been addled by magic. Malfoy made a grotesque face, his mouth sagging open and his eyes rolling. Crabbe and Goyle gave their usual grunts of laughter, and Pansy Parkinson shrieked with glee. Something collided hard with Harry's shoulder, knocking him sideways. A split second later he realised that Neville had just charged past him, heading straight for Malfoy. Neville, no! Harry leapt forward and seized the back of Neville's robes. Neville struggled frantically, his fists flailing, trying desperately to get at Malfoy, who looked for a moment extremely shocked. Help me! Harry flung at Ron. managing to get an arm around Neville's neck and dragging him backwards away from the Slytherins. Crabbe and Goyle were flexing their arms as they stepped in front of Malfoy, ready for the fight. Ron seized Neville's arms, and together he and Harry succeeded in dragging Neville back into the Gryffindor line. Neville's face was scarlet. The pressure Harry was exerting on his throat rendered him quite incomprehensible, but odd words spluttered from his mouth.
Chapter 7. The Key of the Garden. 2 days after this, when Mary opened her eyes, she sat upright in bed immediately and called to Martha, "Look at the moor! Look at the moor!" The rainstorm had ended, and the grey mist in the clouds had been swept away in the night by the wind. The wind had itself ceased, and a brilliant, deep blue sky arched high over the moorland. Never had Mary dreamed of a sky so blue. In India, skies were hot and blazing. This was a deep, cool blue, which almost seemed to sparkle like the waters of some lovely, bottomless lake. And here and there, high in the arched blueness, floated small clouds of small, snow-white fleece. The far-reaching world of the moor itself looked softly blue instead of gloomy purple-black or a awful dreary grey. "Aye," said Martha, with a cheerful grin. "There's storm over for it. It does like this at the time of the year. It goes off in the night, and it was pretending it had never been here, and never meant to come again. That's because the springtime's on the way. It's a long way off yet, but it's a-coming." "I thought perhaps it rained, or looked dark in England," Mary said. No," said Martha, sitting up on her heels among the black lead bushes. "Nowt of the sort." "What does that mean?" asked Mary seriously. "In India, the natives speak different dialects which only a few people understand, so she was not surprised when Martha used words she did not know. Martha laughed, as she had done the first morning. "There now," she said. "I've talked broad Yorkshire again, like Mrs. Medlock, and I said I mustn't. Nowt of the sort means nothing of the sort," slowly and carefully. "But it takes so long to say it. Yorkshire's the sunniest place on earth when it's sunny. I told thee tha'd like the moor after a bit. Just you wait till you see the gold-coloured gorse blooms, and the blossoms of the broom, and the edder flowering all purple bells, and hundreds of butterflies fluttering, and bees humming, and scarlarks soaring up and singing. You want to get out in the sunrise and live out on it all day like Dickon does." "Could I ever get there?" asked Mary wistfully, looking through the window at the far-off blue. It was so new and big and wonderful, and such a heavenly colour. "I don't know," asked Martha. "Tha''s never used those legs since thou was born, it seems to me. Thou couldn't walk 5 mile. That's 5 miles to our cottage." "I should like to see your cottage," Martha said, stared at the moment curiously, before she took up her polishing brush and began to rub the grate again. She was thinking that the small plain face did not look quite so sour at this moment as it had done the first morning she saw it. It looked just like a trifle like little Susan, and when she wanted something very much. "I'll ask my mother about it," she said. "There's one of those that nearly always sees a way to do things. It's my day out today, and I'm going home. I'm glad. Mrs. Medlock thinks a lot of old mother. Perhaps she could talk to her." "I like your mother," said Mary. "I should think that you did," agreed Martha, polishing away. "I've never seen her," asked Mary. "No, thou hasn't," replied Martha. She sat up on her heels again and rubbed the end of her nose with the back of her hand, as if puzzled for a moment, but she ended quite positively. "Well, she's that sensible and hard-working and good-natured and clean that no one could help liking her, whether they'd seen her or not. And I'm going home on my day out. I just jump for joy when I'm crossing the moor. I like Dickon," added Mary, "and I've never seen him." "Well," said Martha sharply, "I've told thee that the very birds like him, and the rabbits, and the wild sheep, and the ponies, and the foxes themselves. I wonder," staring at her reflectively, "what Dickon would think of thee." "He wouldn't like me," said Mary in a stiff, cold way. "No one does." That wasn't it. The grubs laughed. They snatched what was left of the Cadbury's Dairy Milk bar from Bob's hand and then grabbed his arms. They lifted him up, and as Bob yelled for help, they deposited him into the wheelie bin. Before Joe could say anything else, the grubs were stomping off down the road laughing, with their mouths full of stolen chocolate. Joe dragged a wooden crate over, then stood onto it to give himself a bit more height. He leaned down into the bin and caught hold of Bob under the armpits. With a great heave, he started to pull his heavy friend out of the bin. "Are you okay?" he asked as he strained to take Bob's weight. "Oh yeah, they do this to me most days," said Bob. He pulled some spaghetti and Parmesan cheese out of his curly hair. A long time ago, in a far-off land, there lived a foolish king who decided that he alone should have the power of magic. He therefore commanded the head of his army to form a brigade of witch hunters and issued them with a pack of ferocious black hounds. At the same time, the king caused proclamations to be read in every village and town across the land. "Wanted by the king, an instructor in magic." No true witch or wizard dared volunteer for the post, for they were all in hiding from the brigade of witch hunters. However, a cunning charlatan with no magical power saw a chance of enriching himself and arrived at the palace, claiming to be a wizard of enormous skill. The charlatan performed a few simple tricks, which convinced the foolish king of his magical powers, and he was immediately appointed Grand Sorcerer-in-Chief, the king's private magic master. The charlatan begged the king, gave him a large sack of gold so that he might purchase wands and other magical necessities. He also requested several large rubies to be used in the casting of curative charms and a silver chalice or two for the storing and maturing of potions. All these things the foolish king supplied. The charlatan stowed the treasure safely in his own house and returned to the palace grounds. He did not know that he was being watched by an old woman who lived in a hovel on the edge of the grounds. Her name was Babbity, and she was the washerwoman who kept the palace linen soft, fragrant and white. Peeping from behind her drying sheets, Babbity saw the charlatan snap 2 twigs, one from the king's trees, and disappear into the palace. The charlatan gave one of the twigs to the king and assured him that it was the wand of tremendous power. "It will only work, however," said the charlatan, "when you are worthy of it."
The lift was empty when it arrived. Harry jumped in and pulled off the invisibility cloak as it started its descent. To his enormous relief, when it rattled to a halt at level 2, a soaking wet and wild-eyed Ron got in. "Morning," he stammered to Harry as the lift set off again. "Ron, it's me, Harry." "Harry, blimey, I forgot what you look like. Why isn't Hermione with you?" She had to go down to the courtrooms with Umbridge. She couldn't refuse, But before Harry could finish, the lift had stopped again. The doors opened, and Mr. Weasley walked inside, talking to an elderly witch whose blonde hair was teased so high it resembled an anthill. "I quite understand what you're saying, Wakanda, but I'm afraid I cannot be party to—" Mr. Weasley broke off. He had noticed Harry. It was very strange to have Mr. Weasley glare at him with that much dislike. The lift doors closed, and the 4 of them trundled downwards once more. "Oh, hello, Reg," said Mr. Weasley, looking round at the sound of steady dripping from Ron's robes. "Isn't your wife in for questioning today? What's happened to you? Why are you so wet?" "Yaxley's office is raining," said Ron. He addressed Mr. Weasley's shoulder, and Harry felt sure he was scared that his father might recognise him if they looked directly into each other's eyes. "I couldn't stop it, so they sent me to get Bernie Pillsworth, I think they said." "Yes, a lot of offices have been raining lately," said Mr. Weasley. "Did you try Matteo Lejinx Racanto? He worked for Bletchley." "Matteo Lejinx Racanto," whispered Ron. "No, I didn't. Thanks, Arthur." The lift doors opened. The old witch with the anthill hair left, and Ron darted past her out of sight. Harry made to follow him, but found his pathway blocked as Percy Weasley strode into the lift, his nose buried in some papers he was reading.
"It was Mrs. May who first told me about them. No, not me. How could it have been me? A wild, untidy, little girl, who stared with angry eyes and was said to crunch her teeth. Kate, she should have been called. Yes, that was Kate. Not that the name matters much either way. She barely comes into the story. Mrs. May lived in 2 rooms in Kate's parents' house in London. She was, I think, some kind of relation. Her bedroom was on the 1st floor, and her sitting room was a room which, as part of the house, was called the breakfast room. Now, breakfast rooms are all right in the morning, when the sun streams in on the toast and marmalade, but by afternoon they seem to vanish a little, and to fill with a little strange silvery light, their own twilight. There's a kind of sadness in them then, but as a child it was sadness Kate liked. She would creep into Mrs. May's just before tea time, and Mrs. May would teach her to crochet. Mrs. May was old, her joints were stiff, and she was not strict exactly, but she had that inner certainty, which does instead. Kate was never wild with Mrs. May, nor untidy, nor self-willed, and Mrs. May taught her many things beside crochet: how to wind wool into an egg-shaped ball, how to run and fell, and plane a darn, how to tidy a drawer and to lay, like a blessing, above the contents, a sheet of rustling tissue against the dust. "Where's your work, child?" asked Mrs. May one day, when Kate sat hunched and silent upon a hassock. "You mustn't sit there dreaming. Have you lost your tongue?" "No," said Kate, pulling at her shoe button. "I've lost the crochet hook." They were making a bed quilt in woolen squares. They were 30 still to do. "I don't know where I put it," she went on hastily. "I put it on the bottom shelf of the bookcase just beside my bed." "On the bottom shelf?" repeated Mrs. May, her own needle flicking steadily in the firelight. "Near the floor?" "Yes," said Kate. "But I looked on the floor, under the rug, everywhere. The wool was still there, though, just where I'd left it." "Oh dear," exclaimed Mrs. May lightly. "Don't say they're in this house too." "What are?" asked Kate. "The borrowers," said Mrs. May, and in the half-light she seemed to smile. Kate stared a little fearfully. "Are there such things?" she asked after a moment. "As what?" Kate blinked her eyelid. "As people, other people, living in a house who borrow things." Mrs. May laid down her work. "What do you think?" she asked. Kate looked away. "I don't know," she said, pulling hard at her shoe button. "There can't be, and yet—" she raised her head. "And yet sometimes I think there must be." "Why do you think there must be?" asked Mrs. May. "Because of all the things that disappear. Safety pins, for instance. Factories go on making safety pins, and every day people go on buying safety pins, and yet, somehow, there's never any safety pins just when you want them. Where are they all? Now, at this minute, where do they go? Take needles," she went on. "All the needles my mother ever bought me. There must be hundreds. Can't just be laying around this house." "Not laying about the house, no," agreed Mrs. May. "There you are! Where have you been? The most ridiculous rumours! Someone said you'd been expelled for crashing a flying car." "Well, we haven't been expelled," Harry assured her. "You're not telling me you did fly here," said Hermione, sounding almost as severe as Professor McGonagall. "Skip the lecture," said Ron impatiently, "and tell us the new password." "It's Wattlebird," said Hermione impatiently, "but that's not the point." Her words were cut short, however, as the portrait of the fat lady swung open, and there was a sudden storm of clapping. It looked as though the whole of Gryffindor House was still awake, packed into the circular common room, standing on the lopsided tables and squashy armchairs, waiting for them to arrive. Arms reached through the portrait hole to pull Harry and Ron inside, leaving Hermione to scramble in after them. "Brilliant!" yelled Lee Jordan. "Inspired! What an entrance! Fly the car right into the Whomping Willow! People will be talking about that for years!" "Good on you," said a fifth-year Harry had never spoken to. Someone was patting him on the back as though he'd just won a marathon. Fred and George pushed their way to the front of the crowd and said together,
Why couldn't you have called us back, eh? Ron was scarlet in the face, grinning embarrassedly. But Harry could see one person who didn't look happy at all.